She was unaware. That is the detail that matters most, and the detail that will matter least to everyone who wronged her until the day it destroys them completely. On a Tuesday morning in November, on the marble steps of a building she had visited since childhood, Zara Mensah-Cole was handed a divorce envelope by her husband's 26-year-old assistant. Not by her husband, by his assistant, who pressed it into Zara's hands with the practiced nonchalance of someone performing a task she had been quietly looking forward to. Inside the building, through glass doors, Zara no longer had an access card to open. Garrett Cole stood at a podium in front of cameras and industry journalists, announcing the sale of a company he believed he had built. Beside him, introduced to the press as the brand's new creative lead, was Imogen Hale, the woman Garrett, in a private message Zara had read at 2 a.m. and said nothing about, had called the one. And somewhere in the atrium below the stage, Garrett's mother, Sylvia Cole, passed Zara on those same marble steps without slowing down, glanced at her once, and said something about her appearance that made the two journalists standing nearby pretend not to hear. The sound Zara noticed was the absence of one. No voices calling her name, no acknowledgement, just the muffled applause bleeding through the glass, while she stood outside in the cold, holding an envelope addressed to her in her husband's assistant's handwriting. What no one in that building knew, what Zara herself had not yet opened her phone to discover, was that a $3.1 billion trust, built in her name by her late mother over 40 years, had been independently audited that same morning. And the cover letter sitting unread in Zara's coat pocket identified her, in formal legal language, as the wealthiest black woman in the United States. This is not just a story about a wife who was discarded. It is a story about what happens when the people who underestimate a woman have been living, unknowingly, inside everything she owns. If you believe that quiet strength is still strength, leave a like and subscribe, because this channel is built for exactly that. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. We love knowing who's in the room. Now, to understand what happened on those marble steps, we need to go back to where this story really began. The morning had started quietly enough. Zara had dressed carefully, a gray wool coat that buttoned to the throat, the collar high enough to cover the scar she had spent 2 years teaching herself not to hide, and had not yet finished learning to show. She had taken the 147 bus to Michigan Avenue rather than calling a car, the way she always did when she needed to think, and she had arrived at the headquarters of Lux & Lore Cosmetics at 8:47, 14 minutes before the press event was scheduled to begin, only to find that her access card no longer opened the lobby door. She had stood there for a moment, the card in her hand, the quiet clicking of the reader each time she pressed it against the panel. Then she had stepped back. She had waited on the steps. What she could not have known yet, what she would not know until that evening, was that the building she was standing outside had been registered to the Mensah Family Trust since 1998. The glass doors she could no longer enter, the marble beneath her feet. The lobby where Garrett Cole was at that moment shaking hands with journalists, all of it. Hers. She didn't know. She stood on the steps and listened to the muffled applause bleeding through the glass. Garrett's voice reached her in fragments. She caught the words vision and legacy, and built from nothing, and her chest tightened once, sharply, and then steadied. She had heard these words before. She had watched him try them on over the years the way a man tries on suits, testing the fit, adjusting the shoulder, deciding whether they belonged to him. By the 3rd year, he had stopped trying them on. He had started wearing them to bed. Dr. Beatrice Mensah's name did not reach the steps at all. Sylvia Cole arrived at 9:15. She came from the north end of the building, immaculate in a cream coat and heels that struck the marble cleanly, and she passed Zara without slowing. Her eyes moved across Zara once, from collar to hem and back, and she said, in the practiced murmur of a woman who had learned to wound without volume, "That coat does you no favors, sweetheart, but I suppose it hardly matters at this point." Then she was through the lobby door, her access card working perfectly, and she was gone. Zara did not move for several seconds. Her hands were inside her coat pockets, and she pressed her palms flat against her thighs until the tightness in her jaw released. Through the glass, she could see Imogen Hale standing at Garrett's left shoulder. Imogen was in ivory, a structured blazer, her posture unhurried, her attention on the room in the practiced way of someone who understood that being watched was also a form of work. Garrett leaned toward her once and said something. Imogen smiled. The cameras caught it. Zara turned and walked to the cafe on Erie Street. She sat at a table near the window and ordered tea she didn't drink. The cup warmed her hands. Outside, the morning continued in both directions, people moving past with the specific purpose of a Tuesday, coats buttoned, phones out, the city entirely indifferent. She looked at her reflection in the glass. A full-figured woman in a gray coat, 43 minutes out of a marriage, a thyroid scar at the base of her throat, hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The woman in the reflection held a phone notification she had not yet opened. It had arrived at 7:14 that morning. The sender was Constance Webb. It had been sitting in her coat pocket for 2 hours and 23 minutes. She did not open it. Not yet. She sat with her tea and her reflection and the particular silence of a person who has absorbed more than she has processed. And she thought about her mother. The way she always thought about her mother when she needed to understand something she couldn't yet name. To understand why Zara was sitting in that cafe on that Tuesday, holding that cup with that notification unread in her pocket, you have to go back much further than this morning. You have to go back to a small lab above a market street in Accra, and a woman named Dr. Beatrice Mensah, and a company she spent 40 years building quietly. So quietly that even her own daughter never fully understood what she had made. Dr. Beatrice Mensah was not a woman who announced herself. This was a deliberate choice, made early and never reconsidered. She had come to Chicago from Accra in 1983 with a doctorate in cosmetic chemistry from the University of Ghana, a single suitcase, and the particular composure of a woman who understands that a room full of people who have underestimated her is not a disadvantage. She took a position as a research chemist with a mid-size personal care manufacturer on the North Side, spent 4 years learning the business from its foundation upward, and left in 1987 with enough knowledge to build something of her own. She spent the next 4 years in a rented lab above a fabric market on Ring Road Central in Accra, formulating a line of pigment-rich cosmetics designed specifically for deep skin tones at a time when the luxury beauty industry treated that market as an afterthought. She called the company Lux & Lore, incorporated it in Illinois in 1991, and began distribution through a network of independent beauty suppliers across Chicago, Atlanta, and Lagos. By 1999, it had 32 employees. By 2007, it had 400. Beatrice never gave a single interview. She lived in Hyde Park her entire adult life. The same 3-bedroom house on Dorchester Avenue. Second-hand furniture she never replaced. A single pearl necklace worn to every occasion that required one. If you had sat across from her at a dinner party and asked what she did, she would have said she worked in cosmetics. She would have been telling the truth. Zara grew up in that house and absorbed everything her mother practiced and almost nothing her mother owned. She knew the company existed. She had visited the original Accra lab as a child, standing on a step stool to reach the workbench, pressing her fingers into trays of pigment while her mother mixed ratios from memory and explained the chemistry in a voice that made it sound like a form of prayer. What she did not know was the scale. What she did not know was that by the time she was 25, the Mensah Family Trust, drafted by attorney Constance Webb of Webb and Asante LLP on South Michigan Avenue, administered quietly for 11 years, held 61% controlling equity in Lux and Lore Cosmetics and 4 subsidiary brands, and that every share of it was registered in Zara's name as separate premarital property, protected from any future claim by any future spouse. Beatrice was afraid. That was the reason. Not of the money, not of the law, of her daughter. She had watched wealth change people she loved before, had seen the particular way it settled on a young person and rearranged their center of gravity, and she did not want that for Zara. She wanted her daughter to know who she was before she knew what she had. So she kept it. She kept it until she couldn't keep anything anymore. She died in the spring of Zara's 32nd year, a Tuesday in April, a stroke so sudden there was no preparation and no final conversation. She left behind the house on Dorchester her lab notebooks, a pearl necklace, and a small gold perfume compact she pressed into Zara's hand in the hospital 3 days before the end, when she still believed there would be more time. "Don't open it yet," she said. "You'll know when." Zara did not open it. She came back from the grief as a different kind of quiet, hollowed and still, the way a house feels after furniture has been removed. And into that stillness walked Garrett Cole, already 2 years into his role as a brand consultant at Lux and Lore, already someone Zara had noticed and trusted and, over those 2 years of her mother's illness, come to rely on in ways she had not planned. He was careful with her grief. He did not try to fix it or explain it or move past it ahead of schedule. He simply stayed close and let it be what it was. She had never met anyone who did that before. When Beatrice's board met 6 weeks after the funeral to discuss leadership continuity, Zara was the obvious answer. She knew she was the obvious answer. She also knew, with the clear-eyed honesty that had always defined her, that she was not ready. She told them so. She recommended Garrett for the CEO role instead. Interim, she had said, though she had not put a timeline on it. And she watched him walk into the position with the specific confidence of a man who has been handed something he has always believed he deserved. He was good at it. She had to give him that. He understood markets, understood language, understood the particular performance of authority that boardrooms required. In those first years, she sat beside him at meetings and felt, for the first time in a long time, like something was being cared for. She did not hear her mother's voice in those early years. She thought she understood what her mother had built. A good company. A sound one. One that needed Garrett's energy now that Beatrice was gone. She had no idea. Here is what Zara did not know, sitting in that cafe on Erie Street with her cold tea and her unopened notification. That 6 months prior to this Tuesday morning, Garrett Cole had entered into preliminary acquisition discussions with the European luxury conglomerate Maison Vellier, had presented himself in those discussions as the effective owner of Lux and Lore Cosmetics, and had never once mentioned the Mensah Family Trust. Because he did not know it existed. Because he had signed a prenuptial agreement 8 years ago without reading past the 3rd page. And because it had never occurred to him that the woman he had been slowly erasing might hold the ground beneath his feet. The irony, as the narrator can tell you plainly, is almost architectural in its precision. The first public signal of what was coming appeared in a glossy industry profile published in the Chicago Business Review, dated 3 years after Beatrice's death. The headline read, "Garrett Cole and the Quiet Revolution at Lux and Lore." The article was 4 pages long. It did not contain the name Beatrice Mensah once. That interview was the beginning of the end of something. It just wasn't the end Garrett thought he was engineering. The erosion of a marriage rarely announces itself. It doesn't arrive as a single fracture, loud and unmistakable. It arrives as a pattern, quiet, incremental, the kind of thing you only recognize in retrospect when you lay the months end to end and see the shape of what was being built against you. For Zara, the pattern began with corrections. At a brand strategy meeting in the spring, 2 years after Beatrice's death, Garrett interrupted her mid-sentence to reframe what she had just said. Not with aggression, but with the smooth authority of a man who had decided his version was the useful one. The people around the table nodded. Zara finished her tea. It happened again 3 weeks later at a dinner with a senior buyer from Nordstrom. Then at a board presentation in October. Then again, and again, until the interruptions became so regular that Zara began leaving more space at the ends of her sentences, an unconscious accommodation, room for him to step into before she had finished. She did not notice she was doing it for almost a year. The scene softened into something quieter in the evenings. Those first 2 years still had warmth in them, routines that felt like tenderness, a man who came home and asked about her day and meant it. But warmth and pattern are not the same thing, and the pattern was steady. By the 3rd year, Zara had been quietly removed from 3 brand decisions she had originated. Her name dropped from the internal credit on a reformulation project she had led. Her access to the senior communications calendar reduced without explanation. When she raised it with Garrett, he said the changes were operational, that he was streamlining things, that she shouldn't read into it. He said it gently. That was always the worst part, how gently he said the things that took something from her. Then Sylvia Cole began appearing at company events. She arrived as Garrett's guest at the Lux & Lore Autumn Showcase in October of that 3rd year, wearing a white sheath dress and the particular composure of a woman who considers every room a room she belongs in more than you do. She positioned herself at Garrett's shoulder for photographs. She referred to Zara, in conversation with 2 buyers from the Chicago Merchandise Mart, as Garrett's wife. She used to be involved in the early days. Zara was standing close enough to hear it. She smiled at the buyers and excused herself for more water. The body-based remarks came later, after the thyroid diagnosis that Zara received from Dr. Priya Anand at Northwestern Memorial in February, and told no one about. Not Garrett, not anyone. The disorder had been working on her for over a year by then, undetected, rearranging her from the inside. The weight came gradually and then suddenly, in the way of things the body does without asking permission, settling across her hips and stomach and arms in ways she had not known and could not control. She bought new clothes in darker colors. She kept her coat on at events. And Sylvia, who noticed everything that could be measured, began finding occasions to notice aloud. That cut doesn't do you any favors, sweetheart. You might consider something more structured at the neckline. At a charity luncheon on the Gold Coast, in front of 6 women whose names appeared in Chicago Magazine, Sylvia said, to no one in particular, I worry about her, I do. She was such a pretty girl when Garrett married her. Zara pressed her palms flat against the tablecloth and held them there until the moment passed. Imogen Hale joined the company as a PR consultant in August, hired by Garrett without board consultation, introduced to the team in an email that described her as a transformative voice for luxury brand identity. She was 29, British, the kind of professionally polished that reads as effortless to anyone who hasn't learned to look for the effort beneath it. Zara noticed her the way you notice a change in air pressure, not the thing itself, but the shift in atmosphere that signals it. Garrett's schedule began filling differently. His phone stayed face down on the counter now. He began using Imogen's name in contexts that did not require it. a small linguistic habit that only someone paying a certain kind of attention would catch. Zara paid that kind of attention. Then she told herself she was wrong too. The thyroid medication was affecting her concentration, Dr. Anand had said. It affected mood, perception, pattern recognition. Zara filed her suspicions under side effects and waited for the medication to level. She did not investigate. She trusted what she had built with this man, and she trusted the years, and she told herself that what she was feeling was the disorder speaking, not the marriage. It was a Tuesday night in November when she found the phone on the kitchen counter while Garrett slept. She did not intend to read it. The screen lit when she moved it, and the message was already there, sent the previous Thursday at 11:47 p.m. Garrett's name at the top of the thread. She read it once, then again. Then she placed the phone back on the charger exactly as she had found it, walked to the sink, washed her hands, dried them on the kitchen towel, and went to bed. The message said, "She's nothing like Zara. She actually belongs here. She's the one, I think. I've never said that about anyone." Zara lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and told herself she would wait, that she did not have enough, that she still believed in the man beside her, or at least in the version of him she had known before, the man who had been careful with her grief. She told herself that certainty required more than a single message on a borrowed phone. She told herself many things that night. What she could not have known, lying there in the measured dark of a marriage that was already over, was that the certainty she was waiting for was already on its way, arriving not through Garrett's confessions, but through her own locked doors. The first locked door presented itself on a Monday morning in late August. Zara arrived at the Lux & Lore offices on North Michigan Avenue at 8:40, the same time she always arrived, and swiped her access card at the main entry panel. The reader clicked. The light stayed red. She tried it again. The same flat click, the same refusal. A junior marketing associate named Tyler held the door open for her from inside, not thinking anything of it, and she walked through and took the elevator to the 4th floor and said nothing to anyone. She sent an email to the building facilities coordinator flagging the issue. The reply came 2 days later. "It is looking into it. The door was never fixed." Then her inbox changed. She did not notice it immediately. It arrived as a permission adjustment, technical and invisible. Her corporate email quietly downgraded from board-level access to consultant level sometime in the first week of September. The board communications thread disappeared from her sidebar. The quarterly financials stopped routing to her. The acquisition correspondence with Maison Vellier, which she did not yet know existed, had never been visible to her at all. She contacted the IT department again and was told the permissions reflected her current role classification. When she asked what her current role classification was, the response took 4 business days and said, "Independent consultant, non-executive." She had never been given that title. She had never agreed to it. Something hardened in her chest that week. Not loudly, just firmly, the way a lock engages. She raised it with Garrett over dinner on a Thursday evening, laying it out plainly. The card, the email, the title she had not been assigned. He listened with the particular attentiveness of a man who has already made a decision and is performing consideration. He said there had been some administrative restructuring, that it was temporary, that she shouldn't read into it. He said it the same way he said everything difficult, calmly, with a hand briefly on her wrist, as if steadiness were proof of truth. She read into it anyway. The financial restructuring came in October. Garrett sent a single email, copied to their shared accounts administrator at Chase Private Client, explaining that he was consolidating the household accounts for estate planning purposes and moving the primary funds into a sole signatory structure. He framed it as efficiency. He did not ask her. By the time the email arrived, she had already been removed from the joint account's signatory line, a change that had been processed 3 days earlier. Her personal debit card for household expenses declined at a pharmacy on Clark Street on a Wednesday afternoon while she was buying thyroid medication. She stood at the counter and used a different card and did not look at the pharmacist. What happened next, she discovered not through Garrett, but through a paralegal named Marcus Webb, no relation to Constance, who worked at a firm called Hollowell & Grace on Wacker Drive, and who made the administrative error of sending a courtesy notification of proceedings to the wrong email address. The email, forwarded through the household account system before Garrett had fully closed her out, reached Zara on a Tuesday in November. It was a preliminary filing, 11 pages. It identified her as a financially dependent spouse with no independent income and no demonstrable professional function. It was preparing a case that would characterize her, in divorce proceedings, as someone with nothing to bring and nothing to protect. She read it twice. She put her phone face down on the kitchen table and sat with her hands in her lap for a very long time. What she did not know, what she could not have known, was that while Garrett and his attorney at Hollowell & Grace were building a case to strip her of financial standing, Imogen Hale had been present at 3 Maison-Vellier acquisition strategy meetings as Garrett's de facto partner, sitting beside him at the conference table at his firm's offices on LaSalle Street, contributing to discussions about a company she had no legal relationship with, helping shape the terms of a sale that could not proceed without the signature of a woman whose name she did not know, held 61% of everything being discussed. The irony, the narrator observes, is absolute. Sylvia Cole was in Garrett's kitchen that same week. The narrator knows this, though Zara was not there to hear it. She sat at the island with her coffee and told her son that Zara had nothing to protect herself with, that the filing would be straightforward, that men in his position made these corrections all the time. She said the word correction the way she said most things, like a kindness. Garrett nodded and refilled her cup. Neither of them considered, even briefly, that they might be wrong about the nothing. Zara went to the bedroom and opened the nightstand drawer, looking for her phone charger. Her hand found something else instead. Something small and cold and gold. The perfume compact. She had put it there months ago and forgotten it, or told herself she had forgotten it. She held it in her palm for a moment. She did not open it. She was not ready for what was inside, not yet. She could feel that readiness like a weather change coming, close but not arrived. She slipped the compact into the pocket of her cardigan and carried it there for the rest of the day without knowing exactly why. 4 days later, a one-line email arrived from Garrett's assistant with a building address, a time, and the words, "You may attend if you wish. The press event, Tuesday morning. The announcement of the Maison-Vellier acquisition." She was not on the program. She had not been consulted. She had not been invited so much as notified, the way you notify a neighbor about construction noise. She read the email twice and felt something settle in her, below the chest, below the reach of patience. She would attend, she would wear the gray coat, she would stand on those steps and let everything that was coming arrive in its own time. She just did not know yet how much was already there, waiting for her in her own pocket. The invitation arrived on a Thursday evening, 11 days after Zara's debit card declined at the pharmacy. It came from Garrett's assistant, through the corporate system, addressed to her consultant-level email. It read, "Event Tuesday 9 a.m. You may attend if you wish." No address, because they both knew she knew it. No program, because she was not on one. No context, because she was not meant to need any. She ironed the gray coat on Monday night, and did not tell herself why. She took the 147 bus on Tuesday morning and arrived at the Lux and Lore headquarters on North Michigan Avenue at 8:52. The lobby was already arranged for the event. A podium near the north wall, chairs set in rows for press and industry guests, a standing display showing the Lux and Lore logo beside the Maison Vellier crest. Catering staff moved through the space with practiced efficiency. Zara stood inside the door and scanned the room for her name on a seating card, and did not find it. She moved to the back wall and stood there with the compact in her coat pocket, her full hips and rounded arms concealed beneath the wool, her thyroid scar covered by the collar she had buttoned to the top. Sylvia Cole arrived at 9:04 in cream, as she always did at events she considered hers by extension. She entered through the front doors with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once in her life stood at the back of a room. She greeted two journalists by name, clasped hands with a board member Zara recognized from the early years, and then turned and saw Zara standing against the wall. She crossed the room. Not all the way. She stopped 6 feet short and looked at Zara with the expression she had been perfecting for years, the one that registered as concern if you didn't know her. There were 3 journalists within earshot. A senior buyer from Bergdorf Goodman stood close enough to hear every word. "Sweetheart," Sylvia said quietly, "that coat." A brief pause, a tilt of the head. "I do think it's time we had a conversation about what's serving you and what isn't, for your sake." She said it the way a doctor delivers a terminal diagnosis, with measured kindness, as though the cruelty were actually care. Then she turned and found her seat in the front row. Not one person said anything. The buyer looked at her phone. One of the journalists wrote something in his notebook. Zara pressed her palms flat against the wall behind her and breathed. Then something settled. Not resignation, something further down than resignation, below the place where patience lives, in the part of a person that simply decides. Garrett took the podium at 9:15. He was composed in the way of a man who had rehearsed and knew it and did not mind that you could tell. He spoke about vision. He spoke about legacy. He told the story of Lux and Lore as a story of one man's clarity, his market instincts, his rebranding work in years 2 and 3, his negotiating acumen that had secured the partnership with Maison Vellier. He thanked the board. He thanked the legal team. He looked directly at Imogen Hale, who was seated in the second row with her posture impeccable and her expression exactly calibrated, and said, "And to Imogen Hale, whose creative leadership has helped position this brand for the next chapter. Thank you." Imogen nodded once, the practiced nod of someone who had been told this was coming. The name Dr. Beatrice Mensah was not spoken. Not once. The woman who had built the company from a rented lab in Accra in 1991, who had spent 40 years formulating and filing and funding and incorporating and structuring every legal protection that made this event possible. Her name had been quietly removed from the origin story and replaced with Garrett's, and the room did not know to notice, and Zara stood at the back wall and absorbed this the way you absorb something you have been watching come toward you for a long time. A hand touched her arm. She turned. Daniel Osei stood beside her, a quietly distinguished man she had known since childhood, who had worked alongside her mother in Chicago's luxury goods industry for over 2 decades, who had attended Beatrice's funeral and wept without embarrassment. He did not know about the divorce. He did not know about the trust or the filing or the texts or Imogen. He simply looked at Zara with the warmth of someone who remembered who she was before all of this and said, "She would have been so proud. Everything she built, it's still here." He squeezed her arm once and moved away through the crowd. Zara stood very still. Something behind her eyes pressed hard and then retreated. She did not let it come forward. After the event wound down, Garrett crossed the room once. He did not come to her. He moved to within a few feet, caught her eye briefly, the look of a man completing an administrative task, and then turned to his assistant and gave a single nod. The assistant walked to Zara and placed a white envelope in her hand without speaking, and walked away. Zara looked down at the envelope. She looked up at the building's facade. She looked at her phone. The notification from Constance Webb, time-stamped 7:14 that morning, still unread. She put the phone back in her pocket. She put the envelope in her other hand. She walked out through the lobby doors and down the marble steps, and did not look back at any of it. She had carried the compact all day. That evening, for the first time in 3 years, she was going to open it. The apartment had been quiet for weeks, but tonight the quiet had a different quality. It was the quiet of subtraction, of empty hooks where coats had hung, of gaps on the bookshelf where Garrett had begun removing things without announcement, the way men who have already decided sometimes do, carrying out the evidence of themselves in increments, so the ending feels gradual when it is not. Zara took off the gray coat and laid it on the arm of the sofa. She sat down beside it. She placed 3 things on the coffee table in front of her. The divorce papers in their white envelope. Her phone, screen up, the notification from Constance Webb still unread and time-stamped 7:14 that morning. And the compact, small and gold, her mother's, the thing she had carried for 3 years without opening. She sat with all 3 of them for a long moment. The apartment held its breath. She picked up the compact first. It was lighter than she remembered, or than she expected, the way objects carried for too long can feel when you finally hold them with intention instead of habit. The gold casing had a small dent on the lower left edge, made by some long-forgotten contact with some long-forgotten surface, and the clasp opened with a faint click that seemed, in the silence of that room, very loud. Inside, folded twice and pressed against her mother's lab ID card, was a piece of paper. The ID card showed Beatrice at 54, serious and direct in the way of a woman who had never once needed a photograph to prove who she was. Zara held the card for a moment, looked at her mother's face, and set it gently on the table. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was her mother's, the careful, unhurried script of a chemist who had spent 40 years writing precise measurements in lab notebooks and had never lost the habit of clarity. The note read, "You are not behind the brand, my love. You are the brand. I built it for you. I am sorry I was too afraid to tell you while I was still here. Call Constance." Zara read it once. Then again. Then a third time, slowly, the way you read something when you're trying to understand not just the words but the weight of everything that was left out of them for too long. A memory surfaced, unbidden and exact, her mother's hands in the Accra lab, moving through pigment trays with the precision of someone who understood that color was not decoration, but information. Zara had been 9 years old and standing on a step stool to reach the bench. Beatrice had said it then, too, in a lighter register, in the middle of a lesson that Zara had understood as chemistry and not yet as inheritance. You are not behind the brand, my love. You are the brand. Zara had thought her mother was talking about the company. She had not understood that her mother was talking about her. She set the note down beside the ID card. She picked up her phone and opened the notification from Constance Webb. It was a forwarded document. The cover letter was from Mercer and Adjoa Valuations, a Chicago firm specializing in private equity and trust audits. It was addressed to Constance Webb of Webb & Asante, LLP, South Michigan Avenue. It was dated that morning. The subject line read, Mensah Family Trust, Independent Audit Report, Maisonvellier Acquisition Reference. The first substantive paragraph contained a figure, Zara read it and sat very still. $3.1 billion. The second paragraph contained a phrase that she read twice. Net worth ranking, black female principals, United States, current year. First. The auditor had written it without ceremony, the way accountants write things that are simply facts. She put the phone down. She did not cry. She did not make a sound. What she did was breathe. A long, slow exhale that moved through her entire body and took with it something she had been holding for years, without knowing she was holding it. Not the grief, not the marriage, something older than either of those. The particular weight of a woman who has spent a long time wondering if she is enough. It left quietly. She let it go. Then something shifted in her, permanently and without drama. The narrator will not describe Zara as uncertain again. Not soft, not accommodating, not careful in the half-sentence way of a woman making room for everyone else to stand. What she was now, sitting in that stripped-down apartment at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening, was simply clear. She picked up her phone and called Constance Webb. Constance answered on the second ring. She did not say, "I've been waiting," though she had been, for 3 years. She said, "Zara." "What do I need to do?" Zara asked. "Nothing yet," Constance said. "The acquisition meeting is scheduled for the 14th. Let it proceed. Come with me. Bring nothing." "What time?" 9 a.m. I'll send the address." "All right," Zara said. She hung up. The call had taken 47 seconds. She looked at the compact on the table. She picked it up and held it in both hands, and in the quiet of that room, with no one to hear her, she whispered it once, not as a question, not as a wish, but as a recognition arriving exactly when it was needed. "You are the brand." She closed the compact. She placed it in the pocket of the gray coat. She turned off the lamp, and she went to bed. The acquisition signing was in 6 days. The Maison-Vellier Chicago offices occupied the 43rd floor of a building on North Wacker Drive, and the conference room where the acquisition signing was scheduled looked west over the river, the glass catching the flat gray light of a Monday morning in a way that made everything in the room look precise and serious and lit for consequence. Garrett arrived at 8:45 with his legal team from Kress and Harmon Associates, 3 attorneys in dark suits, one carrying a leather portfolio that Garrett had looked at twice on the elevator up. Imogen Hale arrived at 8:50 in charcoal, her posture assembled and certain, and took the chair beside Garrett's. The Maison-Vellier acquisition team arrived at 8:55. The lead partner, whose name was Philippe Renard, and 2 of his attorneys from the Paris office, who had flown in on Sunday. Philippe was late 50s, silver-haired, professionally still in the way of men who have been in enough rooms to know that composure is its own form of power. He shook Garrett's hand, nodded to Imogen without expression, and took his seat at the head of the table. Garrett's phone buzzed. He turned it face down. It buzzed again. Sylvia, the narrator knows, had been texting since 8 a.m., first wishing him well, then asking for updates, then simply sending his name as a question, the way anxious people do when they have no information and cannot stand the silence. At 9:07, the door opened. Zara walked in wearing a green wrap dress, her thyroid scar visible above the neckline, unhidden for the first time in 2 years in a room this size. The compact was in her coat pocket, which she folded over her arm as she entered. Behind her, Constance Webb of Webb and Asante LLP carried 2 document folders, placed them on the table without ceremony, and sat down beside Zara with the stillness of someone who has been waiting a long time and is finished waiting. Garrett's jaw tightened. He said quietly, controlled, "Zara, what are you doing here?" Constance placed her hand on the top folder. "We'll proceed," she said. One of the Kress and Harmon attorneys leaned toward his colleague. The colleague shook his head very slightly. Neither of them recognized Constance's name. Philippe Renard looked at Zara for one measured moment, then opened his own folder. "We'll begin with the share structure verification," he said. "Standard pre-signing procedure." His attorney, a woman named Claire Bertrand, who had done the ownership research on Friday and had called Philippe at home that evening, slid 3 copies of the structure document across the table. The room fell quiet as people read. The document identified 3 equity positions in Luxe and Lore Cosmetics. The first, Garrett Cole, advisory equity, 12%. The second, the Maison Vellier acquisition vehicle, pending. The third, the Mensah Family Trust, controlling equity, 61%, sole beneficiary and managing trustee Zara Mensah-Cole. The room went silent. Not the polite transitional silence of a meeting moving from one agenda item to the next. Something harder. The silence of a room recalibrating. Garrett's lead attorney, a man named Douglas Kress, looked at the document and then at Garrett with an expression that Garrett did not meet. Imogen read it twice. The second time, something in her posture shifted, barely visible, but the narrator catches it, a fractional tightening around the shoulders, the body registering information the mind is still processing. Garrett said, "That's not... There must be an error in the document." Philippe Renard did not look at him. The structure was independently verified Friday by Mercer and Adjoa Valuations. There is no error. He looked at Constance. "Ms. Webb." Constance opened the first folder. She placed the trust documentation on the table. The original instrument drafted in 2019, the prenuptial agreement signed by Garrett Cole in the same year, the Mercer and Adjoa audit report. Then she opened the second folder and placed a third document on the table. 14 months of board-level decisions made and executed without the knowledge or consent of the trust's controlling shareholder. The unauthorized engagement of Hale Communications as Luxe and Lore's PR firm. The Maison Vellier acquisition negotiation, initiated without trustee consultation. The systematic removal of Dr. Beatrice Mensah's name from the company's official history across all public-facing materials. Each item dated, each item documented. Garrett looked at the prenuptial agreement. He recognized his own signature. He remembered signing it, a Saturday morning 8 years ago, 3 weeks before the wedding, a document he had scanned rather than read because he had been certain there was nothing in it worth protecting against. He said, "Zara?" His voice had changed. Not louder, smaller. "You need to understand that Mr. Cole," Constance said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "The trust holds controlling interest. You hold advisory interest. This table does not require your signature to proceed. It requires Ms. Mensah-Cole's." Imogen stood. She did not say anything. She gathered her portfolio, her phone, her pen, with the efficient composure of someone who makes swift calculations and acts on them without sentimentality. She did not look at Garrett. She walked to the door, opened it, and left. Garrett watched her go. He did not call her name. He did not move. The room absorbed this. Philippe Renard made a brief note. His attorney Claire Bertrand did not look up from her document. Zara slid her counterproposal across the table. Full acquisition at a valuation of $1.4 billion. Garrett's advisory contract dissolved effective the date of signing. Hale Communications engagement terminated. Unauthorized. Philippe read it without expression. He looked at Zara. He looked at the document. He said, "We'll need 2 days to confirm the revised valuation internally. The structure terms are acceptable." He paused. "Ms. Mensah-Cole, I understand you are the wealthiest black woman in the country." Zara looked at him and nodded, once, with the expression of a woman still settling into something that was always true. Garrett spoke. His voice, for the first time, had lost its management, the tone stripped down to something raw and less practiced. "Why are you doing this?" he said. "After everything. Why this way?" The room stilled. Zara looked at him, not with cruelty, not with triumph, with the particular clarity of someone who has already moved past the place where this conversation lives. "You were trying to sell something," she said, "that was never yours to sell." She picked up the pen. She signed the counter-proposal. She placed the pen on the table and did not pick it up again. The Maison Vellier attorneys gathered their copies. Philippe Renard stood, buttoned his jacket, and addressed Zara with a brief professional nod before moving toward the door. Constance closed both folders. She stood, collected her coat from the back of her chair, and waited. Zara rose. She picked up her coat. The compact pressed gently against her palm through the fabric. She walked out without looking back. Behind her, Mensah-Cole sat alone at the head of a conference table on the 43rd floor of a building on North Wacker Drive, in the flat gray light of a Monday morning, with his name on a document that no longer meant what he had believed it meant, in a room that had emptied around him so quietly he had barely heard it go. The weeks after the signing moved quickly for some people, and very slowly for others. Garrett's advisory contract dissolution was reported in the Chicago Business Review 14 days after the Maison Vellier meeting. A single paragraph in the deals section, 3 sentences, factual and complete. It confirmed that the acquisition of Luxe and Lore Cosmetics by Maison Vellier S.A. had proceeded under revised terms negotiated with the trust's controlling shareholder, and that the outgoing advisory CEO, Mensah-Cole, had been released from his role with immediate effect. The same issue ran a separate item on page 7 identifying the controlling shareholder by name. It noted her national ranking. It used both her names, not Cole, Mensah-Cole. The hyphen that Garrett had spent 3 years casually dropping from introductions was printed in full, in ink, and people read it over coffee on Michigan Avenue and on the commuter trains and in the breakfast rooms of the hotels where the industry liked to meet, and slowly, in the way that cities process information about people who were wrong about themselves, Chicago understood what had happened. Garrett's phone went quiet. The invitations that had come easily for 8 years, the board dinners, the advisory panels, the speaking slots at industry conferences, stopped arriving with the specific silence of doors not being slammed, but simply no longer opening. He called Zara twice. She did not answer. He left a voicemail on a Thursday evening. The narrator knows its contents, its careful mixture of sincerity and self-justification, its final halting admission that he had been afraid. And Zara listened to it once, standing at the kitchen counter where she had stood at 2 a.m., reading his texts 14 months before, and deleted it. He sent a message through Constance asking to discuss the terms. Constance replied in one sentence on Zara's behalf, "There is nothing to negotiate." Imogen Hale's firm lost the Luxe and Lore contract the same day the dissolution was announced. The termination had been written into the counter-proposal, authorized on the day of signing. Within 3 weeks, 2 other clients in the Chicago luxury market had quietly ended their engagements with Hale Communications. The industry did not make speeches about it. It simply redistributed its business, the way markets do when a signal has been clearly received. Imogen left Chicago in the 4th week. The narrator does not follow her further than the airport. Sylvia Cole's autumn social calendar, the galas, the charity lunches, the board memberships carried for years on the reflected weight of her son's position, began to thin. Not immediately, and not with drama. The thinning was social, incremental, the same kind of pattern Sylvia had inflicted on others for decades, invitations that came a little later, then a little less often, then not at all. The story she had been performing for a decade required a CEO's son to make it work. Without him, the story had no stage. She did not call Zara. She was too composed for that. But she understood, in the particular way of a woman who has spent her life reading rooms, that the room had changed and she was no longer in it. Then something shifted. The scene moved. Chicago fell away. Accra is warm in the way that is not performance, a warm that has been here longer than any of this, that will be here long after, that belongs to itself and not to anyone's story about it. The market street below the lab was loud at midday, with the particular noise of a city going about its business without needing anyone's permission, and the light through the single window fell in a wide yellow column across the workbench and caught the dust and made it look, briefly, like something intentional. Zara stood at the bench and mixed pigments. Her hands moved through the motion her mother had taught her when she was 9 years old. The ratio, the fold, the slow incorporation of base into color that you could not rush without losing the depth. Her thyroid scar caught the light at the base of her throat. She did not cover it. There was no one here to offer an opinion about it, and she had stopped carrying opinions that were not her own. The compact sat open on the bench to her left. The lab ID card leaned against the side of the mixing bowl. Beatrice's face looked out from it at the room she had built, at her daughter's hands, at the afternoon. Zara was not performing peace. She was simply in it, the specific, unannounced quiet of a person who has set something down and has not picked it back up. After a while, she whispered it. To the room, to her mother, to no one in particular. The words that had been waiting in a compact for 3 years, that had arrived at precisely the moment they were needed, and not a day before. You are the brand. Not a question, not a mantra, just the truth, recognized at last from the inside. This is what the story has always been about, underneath the documents and the signing tables and the dissolved contracts. It is not about wealth, though the wealth is real. It is not about the collapse of the people who were wrong, though they were wrong. It is about what a woman becomes when she is allowed to grow up without the weight of knowing what she owns, and what she is capable of when she finally does know and chooses, out of dignity rather than calculation, to let the truth speak entirely for itself. The most dangerous thing a woman can be is quietly, genuinely herself. The people who need to underestimate her will always oblige, and the distance between who they thought she was and who she actually is, that distance is not a wound. That distance is the story. That distance is the gift. If any part of Zara's story reflected something you recognized, in yourself, in someone you love, in a silence you kept for longer than you should have, leave a comment and tell us. We read everyone. And, as always, let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. The lab light held. The street below was loud. Zara's hands moved through the pigment, steady, unhurried, certain, and the compact sat open beside her, its work done, its note no longer needed, in the room where everything began.